Welcome back to Skills Upgrade, a Talking Drupal miniseries following the journey of a Drupal 7 developer learning Drupal 10. This is episode 4. I'm Amy June Heinlein. I am a Drupal mentor coordinator, and I work at the Linux Foundation as their certification community architect. During this miniseries, we follow a Drupal 7 developer as he upgrades his skills to work on Drupal 10 projects with the ultimate goal of supporting Drupal 10 project and contribution to the community. Each week, we have a mentor who will review the developer's progress, answer questions, and then set goals for the upcoming week. Let's meet our developer. Our developer is Chad Hester. That's Chad Hester on Drupal.org. He's an enterprise technical consultant and solution architect with a background in website development of over 20 years. And our mentor is Mike Anello. You can find him at Ultimike on Drupal.org. He is the co-founder and vice president of Drupal Easy, which is a Drupal training and consulting firm based in Central Florida. In the third episode, Mike assigned Chad some tasks that included handling gitignore files, installing Drush, and utilizing the examples module. I'm really curious how Chad did setting up that gitignore Drupal recommended project composer template. That was a mouthful. I remember when I did it being confused about my first attempts, and I committed way too many things, and then having to go back and figure out where I'd gone astray. And I'm hoping we check back in on the Rancher desktop task. And of course, I'm really excited to hear about working with the page examples module and how that helps Chad with this journey into learning Drupal 10.
All right. Hello again, Chad. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right. Did you have a good week? You do lots of Drupaling?
Yes. It was actually a holiday on Monday that I totally spaced on. So my wife and I went to Quadra Island. So that bit into it a little bit, but I made it through the exercise and realized how much I don't remember about PHP and more specifically object-oriented programming. So spent a lot of time with that.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I actually look forward to these type of Monday holidays where I tend to work on a lot of them. And I really enjoy working on them because I'm not getting like a ton of new email in those days. And I find myself like super productive. So I did not take Monday off at all. But anyway, let's talk about the task from last week. We'll start off with the really easy one because I think you had already done it, or maybe not. But did you install Drush with Composer?
Yep. Drush was one of the things that I installed alongside with the Drupal coding standard stuff. That's already done.
And that's kind of one of those things. Like I forgot to mention it in episode 1 or 2, whichever episode that was, and it was just kind of silly. I'm like that. That's like one of those things after you do your Composer create project and add admin toolbar, I'm also adding Drush at that point. So it's kind of a, if you're developing Drupal sites professionally, you need to make sure you have Drush installed locally as well. So, all right, the next one I think is a nice meaty topic. And it's actually good timing that you brought it up. So tell me about you and gitignore files with this project.
I'm mostly used to using a .gitignore file in the doc root from my Drupal 7 and other projects sort of days. Any of the ignores that would be more global, I would just set up for my user, whether it's OS or IDE dependent, and then focus more on the project dependent stuff in the .gitignore file itself.
Yep, makes sense. So how did you find the process of setting up a .gitignore file for a Drupal recommended project composer template?
That was very different. I think that the fact that it came from DDEV kind of adds this extra layer above it, above the doc root, the parent, if you will, that DDEV operates in. And it didn't ignore
Yeah, but that's not really
folder.
DDEV specific though. Having that nested doc root, it's not DDEV specific. That's part of the Drupal recommended project composer template.
Okay. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah. So, that one, we're not going to, I'm going to be a DDEV defender. I'm actually wearing my DDEV t-shirt today, so I'm going to defend DDEV on this one. But tell me what process you went through. And I find this, you're going to understand why I find this so fascinating in a few minutes. Tell me the process you went through to figure out how to set up the .gitignore files, plural, in order to, do the right thing as far as Composer is concerned and not commit dependencies to the repository?
So I definitely committed dependencies to the repository. I'll just get that part out of the way. It's one of those, I set it up and I expect it to work a certain way, and then it doesn't. So I'm starting to realize the .gitignore file needs to truly be in the root of wherever the Git repo exists. And there isn't one presently. So I'll have to remove those things out of my initial commit, or just wipe the repo and do it again. But I put it in the web folder, because that's where the copy statement occurred.
Dig into that a little bit. What do you mean that's where the copy statement occurred?
Yeah, so
because I know what you're saying, but I want you to explain it a little bit more for everyone else.
Yeah. So from last week, the instruction was to go into and copy web/example.gitignore to web/.gitignore, which I did that. And then just tweaked it with a couple of the lines like /vendor, /web/core, etc. And then finally that SQL.gz. So that's done with a couple other things from the global side. And then I went into the parent directory and created a Git repo and did all the commit and all that. And then I'm like, wait a minute, the vendor directory's in there.
Yeah. So I guess I have to take a little bit of blame for that, because maybe my instructions weren't clear enough, and that's fair. And I will take that blame. But what you've hit on here, this is, in my opinion, like a big hole or a big issue with the Drupal recommended project composer template, especially for folks who aren't, who are your exact position, right? Going from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10 and trying to figure all this stuff out. The reason why I got such a good laugh as I was reading all your notes about this is because when I teach modern Drupal, I give the instructions are 2 steps. Step 1 is just to copy that web/example.gitignore to gitignore, and then leave it. Don't modify it. And then step 2 of my instructions is create a new .gitignore file at the project root, which it sounds like you eventually figured out on your own. You found some other resources, I think, right?
It was really just creating the Git repo. So when I saw the vendor directory get committed, I'm like, okay, I see what's wrong.
Right. But so if you don't know, I've looked, there is no documentation page on Drupal.org, as far as I can find, that has crisp, clear instructions as to what to do and why you're doing it. And stuff like that makes me a little bit crazy. And yes, I know there's people out there saying, well, Mike, why don't you just write one? And okay, I accept that. I will take that criticism. But this bit of where you have to kind of figure out on your own to create that project level .gitignore and put, all the composer installer paths in there and whatever else you want to put in there. That to me is that's kind of an issue. So, because I've been teaching, folks how to do that manually for years now. And just a few weeks ago, it finally got to the point, and talking to you a couple of weeks ago was part of the impetus for me, was I was able to track down an issue on Drupal.org about adding a .gitignore file to the project root of the Drupal recommended project composer template. Something that just is automatically there. So it's funny because the issue's been going on for a while. There's a lot of discussion of, pros and cons, what should be in that .gitignore file, and a current discussion, which, by the way, this is the funniest part. Those of you that listen to Talking Drupal, Nick, one of the main Talking Drupal hosts, he's part of this discussion. So I'm wondering if it's ever come up on Talking Drupal or not. But there's a big, I don't even want to call it a debate, but there's a discussion about, should it be an example .gitignore file, or should we just dump a .gitignore file in there by default and let people comment it out if they don't want it? But This, I think, is a really important issue, and you illustrated it perfectly for us of
I
why
fell right into
something
that
like
bear
this.
trap.
Yeah, but it's going according to my plan exactly. I'm like, we need an example of someone who is really going to get screwed by this. I know just the guy.
Well, it's fortunate, and I think this kind of exemplifies the difference between someone brand new learning Drupal or even PHP and Get for that matter, and someone that's done it before. As soon as I saw that vendor directory go into the repo, I knew exactly what went wrong. I know how to correct
Yep.
it because of my
Yep.
experience. But someone else might just charge forward with a dirty repo, and yeah,
It's not good. It's not good. Yeah. Yeah, because well, anyway, I can go on and on about this issue, but I will not, because we're going to try and keep this to a half hour, as is our goal. So, I did put the link in in our Google Doc, so hopefully the powers that be will put that link will end up in the show notes somewhere. All right, so tell me, how else, before we get to the examples module stuff, was there anything else that you found while you were kind of setting things up?
So I think we addressed the general question, and I like the link there. It was one of those questions that I kind of felt I knew the answer for, so we kind of walked through that.
Yeah,
Nothing
but really,
else. I think with
I'll just say the
go ahead.
right answer is for it to not be an issue. It should just be there for you. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But aside from that, I think one of the other things that kind of confused me was as I look at even the example.getignore has examples where you have folders that have a trailing slash and some that don't. It's little inconsistencies like that really trip me up. I'm like, is this okay? Is this on purpose? I don't know.
Didn't I assign that to you for homework last week to figure out if the trailing slash and the getignore matters or not? I'm pretty sure I said that's your job to figure that out and come back. Didn't
Oh,
I? Didn't I say that?
that because the homework wasn't written down, I didn't remember.
Aha.
So
Okay,
that's on me
fair.
for missing that note.
No
But
problem.
I found plenty of examples on like GitHub that still were that inconsistent.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the
Yeah.
answer to that. I don't know if it matters. I don't know if one is considered a best practice over the other. I don't know if there's some like tiny little edge case where the slash matters. I just don't have the answer to that. So, all right.
Maybe
Shall we
one of the
move on to the
listeners
examples
will.
module?
Yeah, let's do that. I think that's where the majority of my time really ended up going anyway.
All right.
Because once you crack code, it kind of like just gets the brain going.
Yeah. So we were gonna have you focus on the examples module has a bunch of sub modules. Each sub module focuses on a different aspect of Drupal backend development. You were looking at the page example sub module,
Yep.
which focuses on routes and controllers. So, what did you find? What do you
Yeah.
think? What did you find that didn't make a whole lot of sense, or what did you have to dig into? Go.
Well, I think the first, and this is another really strong example of what you were talking about before, is that search for the right documentation. It's sort of like, we live in a land of laws, and you don't know if you're breaking one unless you know all the laws, sort of thing. What I did was I just actually sat down with every single file that was in that examples module just to get a sense of what files are common for modules, what folder structures are there, what's the purpose of that. But one thing that I don't think anybody's going to piece together in their mind right off the bat is, why would I put code in one file like .module versus a YAML file versus a class versus etc. And I think a visual diagram of that would be really helpful as opposed to a wall of text and documentation. I think that would make this a lot easier to understand the choices that a person would make strategically. But that was my first stop, is getting into like the file and folder structure and just trying to take some notes on that as far as I could. And I made some assumptions. So there's some questions I have related to that.
See, I think, everyone's brain works differently. So, I'm going to look at it from my perspective. That seems like, I don't know how much value that would be for me to do it that way, because I don't know the scale, right? I don't know how many files and folder structures and file types matter. Like if someone told me there's really only 12 different file types in Drupal, that if you understand those 12, then you're good to go. Then to me, that would be a more approachable task, right? What you're doing is, okay, well, let me go through all these modules and see if I can't pick out the 12 and find some commonalities, because at least I knew where the finish line was. But going into it blind,
I think so. I have to point back at Drupal 7 and earlier days because it was very repetitive in this sense. If I wanted to name my module, if I wanted to create a description, that's your .info file. And now it's a YAML file. That's fine. If I wanted to start creating code and then have things load up, that's your .module file. Again, that's fine. If I wanted to have some sort of a template for, the front end, then that's your template files that you put those things in with whatever the suggestions were. That took a while to understand, but again, it's the obvious place to put those things once you know those rules. But that's the thing, is this accumulation of rules of where things should go versus how many times have we encountered new developers to Drupal that just go in and they hack core and killing kittens quote.
This is why having folks learning Drupal talk about stuff like this is so valuable. Because for me, looking at like modern Drupal's file structure, like module file structure from the other side, where I'm already comfortable with it, to me, it looks 50 times more organized and reasonable and easier to understand than Drupal 7.
Sure.
But completely different perspective than you know. Okay, so I understand why you kind of did it that way. So were you able to make any like kind of general conclusions?
Yeah. And I ran across documentation to really help me along the way, just figuring out, well, what question do I need to ask to get a good answer from Drupal.org or any other resource. And it started off first just reading through each one. There were a few markdown files. Okay, that's cool. There are some files that I'm not personally familiar with, so they're kind of still an outstanding question. And I'm not going to read through each one, but the patterns were obvious. Like you have CSS folder, you have a templates folder, you have the subfolder of modules, which had all the example modules. So that made sense. And each one of those had their own personal examples of things like different YAML files. And then as I looked at each one, like links.menu versus links.task and action and contextual, all of a sudden that's, well, okay, now that's what the menu API is using. And that sent me reeling down that road of figuring things out. But I wouldn't have known that unless I'm stumbling my way through each one of those examples. The examples module is a great project to learn it, tripping over my feet the whole way.
Well, it's funny because my plan was to expose you to one of those submodules at a time and get you comfortable with just a small number of files, like a routing.yaml file. And then, a controller class, which is always going to be in the module /src/controller, that directory. And that way, once you get comfortable with, like, let's just say those two things, a routing file and a controller file, then you could crack open any other Drupal module. And if you see a routing file, boom, you know what that is. If you see an src/controller directory, boom, you know what that is. Right. So I was approaching it where, okay, we're going to introduce Chad to a limited number of different kinds of things each week. And then as the weeks progress, he'll know a greater and greater percentage of all the files. Where you're, the way you like to learn, clearly it sounds like is, no, before I dive in deep, I need to wrap my arms around all of these file types.
Yeah.
And
it can be overwhelming.
So that's interesting.
But but it helps me
Fair.
feel oriented. It's kind of, I'd call it a mapping problem. It's just being aware of what's there and
Yeah.
then getting into the grit of it. So that way, if I
Okay.
suddenly have that question of like, okay, I've done everything I can in this file, but what if I have this other problem? Then at least I have that little breadcrumb that I left myself of. That's over there.
Yeah.
That's where the links menu thing is.
See, that's really interesting because the way I design teaching is I generally don't introduce a topic, and you can replace the word topic with a file, right?
Yeah.
Like I would not introduce the menu links.tasks.yaml file until we had a problem to solve and that file solved the problem. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, I would feel like I'm going to go through this list of 30 files. I'm just going to tell you what each one does, but no one's going to remember any of them because it's not solving, it's not scratching anyone's itch type of thing. So, all right, that's really interesting though that you approach things that way.
It's
All
the
right, so
neurodiversity.
yeah, did you see anything that kind of struck you as odd the way that Drupal sets up modules as far as the
Yeah.
file anatomy?
So once I got into the source directory, obviously different modules have different files and others don't, and that I always expect that. The structure of the source directory above all of them seems to be where a lot of the real sausage making tends to
Yeah.
occur.
Yep.
And it's also that PSR4 standard like coming into
Yep.
play with controller form, plugin, entity, I'm sure several others. And tests was
Yeah.
under there too for simple tests, which I'm guessing is phasing out, in a separate folder for test/source for PHP unit, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of simple test stuff left.
Yeah.
Did you see stuff in the examples module? I'd be surprised by that. But yeah, no, the standard place for, and for what we're going to do for our capstone here, goal of yours, to contribute an automated test is we're going to focus on PHP unit. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Inside of a module's root directory, there is generally, if that module has tests, there's going to be a test directory, the lowercase t.
Mm-hmm.
Inside of that, there's going to be an SRC directory. And that's literally where the namespace points to. There's going to be a namespace that's going to be Drupal/test/ the module machine name. That part of the namespace maps to the module's test/SRC directory.
Okay.
And that's universal. That is, just like the namespace for Drupal / the name of the module, that maps to the module's SRC directory.
Okay. And then it
So
just extends from there.
And extends from there. Yeah. So this is why, this is one of the reasons why I think just the organization of files in modules in modern Drupal is just so, it's such a huge change from Drupal 7 days. And we've talked about this before, Ben. I gave the example
so
of.
to ask, do you end up using like require once ever, or do we just rely on a lot of auto loading? Okay.
No.
So that's
it's all auto loading.
New point.
I don't know if I have, have I ever used an include or a require?
Yeah, it's more procedural, I guess.
It's been a long time.
At this point. Well, I think the summation of that, I mean, I made a few assumptions and I'm happy to look at those, but as it pertains to the organization, you're right. It does make a lot more sense once you're in the know. And I think running into the Drupal.org article specifically about the PSR4 naming namespace and auto loading, that was good because it at least showed me the directory structure, what to expect. I'm always a pet peeve though, when it comes to naming, because some folders are named plural and some are singular. Which is
Okay, that's a whole other episode because I've got thoughts about that as well. So let's not go down that route. All right.
So we'll walk it back.
Let's go back to the page example module. Let's focus on routes and controllers, or the routing YAML and controller classes. And once you kind of wrapped your arms around that example, make sense? Anything throw you? Anything that you still isn't super clear? Or how'd you feel about that once you got into it?
Yeah. So what I did was I just made a copy of it into the custom module directory. So obviously, again, those are slightly different, which is pleasant now that Core
Mm-hmm.
kind of created that space, and no more of the sites default or sites whatever. I started off by just going into each file and just renaming everything to have my own namespace, and just kind of take it over, if you will.
Sure.
The editor itself, again, just getting back into IDEs, learning VS Code, getting used to the automatic error handling that the IDE was doing was really clever and fun. Got through that.
A lot of that's
After,
going to be PHP IntelliFence that you installed.
yeah,
It's doing a lot of that. So let's give that credit for sure. It's a very important extension if you're using VS Code.
yep. And I figured it was that. I remember those types of things from, I mean, these are things that existed for a very long time, even before I used like Komodo and PHP Storm. Even some of the Microsoft stuff had that. But I agree. That's part of the reason why I don't use them or just those sort of console-based editors, because I actually like that. It makes my coding faster. But also, the namespaces, it yelled at me for not having things in the alphabetic order, so I remember that.
That's
Also,
PHPCS. It's a newish Drupal coding standard to have the use statements in alphabetical order. Yep.
and also the PHP doc standard. And when you're having that inherit doc command, I guess, or directive or whatever.
Yep. Yep.
Getting into that, getting back into the classes. I had to actually crack open PHP.net to just refresh my memory on some of the object-oriented stuff as well. Like I didn't really know what a trait was. So I had to understand what is the difference between a trait, a class. I understood what an interface was, and like kind of like a .h file in C++. But just why would I choose to use those, or an abstract class, or any of those? So I dug into that quite a bit.
Yeah, when I introduce traits to our module development students, I always use the string translation trait. Because no matter when, if you were involved in Drupal development at any time in the past 15 years, you know the T function.
Yeah.
And in modern Drupal, the T function is delivered to classes via the string translation trait. So it's a great example of like why we need traits, because so many classes need that T function, and we just drop that T function in with the trait, and boom, we're good to go.
Handling strings, you just use that trait. Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
So I got through. I got through like refactoring things and just really reading all the lines of code that were in there. It's not much. It's not too big, but it got me used to like where things are deliberately put. And it seems like not only are there things auto-loading for classes, but you're also auto-loading things from YAML files. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much that we're auto-loading them, but a lot of the YAML files in modules, when we rebuild caches, either via the admin menu or Drush CR, a lot of what's going on is those YAML files are being, scanned, parsed, cached. So when you are then utilizing like, the routing file, let's talk about that one since we're talking about the page example module. One of the things that happens during cache rebuild is all of those routes from all of the routing files and all of the enabled modules get parsed and cached somewhere in Drupal's database. And then they're just there. So when someone hits a route, it's not like, when someone hits a path in their browser, it's not like Drupal is saying, oh my gosh, I have to find the file. I have to read through all the routing files again and figure out if anyone is serving this path. No, it's a freaking database lookup because this stuff's all been cached.
Right.
So I wouldn't call it auto loading, but it's, all those YAML files. And here's a little sneak peek at your next homework when we're going to talk about plugins in a minute, but the annotations on plugins, same thing. Those are all, pre-fetched, parsed and cached by Drupal during cache rebuild. So it's all just there. So I wouldn't call it auto loading. Let's keep auto loading for PHP classes.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, I think that makes sense. But there's some sort of automation happening, caching, when it's trying to understand the code that's there and any of the changes that are occurring. I did see that there was also a Twig template in there that's firing based on whatever's actually being called. So getting a little exposure to Twig, at least in that sense.
And that was an example of anytime a module is going to output HTML, the best practice is for that HTML to be in a Twig file. So in this example, that's a great example of kind of a base template file, or no matter what, even if there's no theme, if your site is using Stark, and that page is called and that template file is called upon, even if there's nothing to override it, there's still some HTML that's coming out from that base template file that you saw. So you'll see in a lot of Drupal modules, they're just low-level template files. That's kind of like the rock bottom, like, if you ever played Minecraft and you get down to level, like the bedrock level. There's you can't go beneath back, I haven't played in a while, so I don't know if there's anything below bedrock now, but there was never anything. You couldn't get past bedrock. But that's the end of the line. If nothing's overriding it, you're getting what's in that template file. So you can't really define a render array that uses a template file unless you provide a base template file.
Okay, I did see the line, protected default template equals Stark in the class for the test, the page example test. And I was curious about that. So I think that kind of pieces it together a little bit. Is okay, you should at least have this output.
Yeah, it's kind of just the default. There should be something. Yeah.
I think what's kind of new too is when looking at any of these files. So let's take the page example controller.php. The controller that's created, the page example controller, extends controller base. If I'm a developer, I have to be aware of what I would choose to use or extend or inherit.
Yes,
lots of learning there.
But we've got a great tool that gives us the answer 90% of the time, which is drush generate. So if you were going to create a new route in controller, you could do exactly what you did, copy and paste it from the examples module or somewhere else. What I do and what I teach is drush generate allows you to select the thing you want to create, and it has options to create a new route, a new a custom form or any type of plugin, and it will scaffold the file for you, extending the proper base. And I'm going to put proper in air quotes. It's proper 95% of the time, the proper base class. And that's another, again, once you start looking at a lot of different, things in Drupal module development, like you looked at controllers. Well, there's a controller base that comes from Drupal core. It shouldn't be that much of a surprise. If you look at, creating a new custom form, guess what? It's going to extend form base. If you want to create a new configuration form, it's going to, extend config form base. In this next week, I'm going to have you look at plugins and looking at widgets, field widgets. Guess what? Your widget is going to extend a core widget base. So this is a very common pattern in Drupal that, and this is kind of the point, right? This is the point of a CMS. Well, not so much but a framework, right? It gives you all this low-level classes for you to build upon, and Drupal's no different, and it does a really nice job of doing that as well.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the orientation. And I don't want to your point earlier, I'm not necessarily trying to know it all at once. Temptation's very there. But But I think that this is a good point as we're taking the baby steps is being aware that um, this isn't so much like the days of yore where things are being written from scratch. There's a lot of this, standardization that's occurred. There's a
Yeah.
lot of this scaffolding that's available, and
Yep.
that's encouraging.
Yeah, no, and the vast majority of it is really good. I mean, are there parts of Drupal core that, sometimes we have to work with that we're like, oh, this should be better. Absolutely. Am I going to say what they are in this episode? Absolutely not. This is a feel good episode. Maybe we'll have to do another episode that's not so feel good. But should we move on to next week? I think we're
Yeah.
I think we're already at a half hour, right? Or close to it.
Yeah, I think in general the assignment was good. I loaded up the page after I created it. I got the text that I had changed to show up as I expected to. So at least it gives me confidence that, hey, I can make it that far. Again, baby steps.
Yeah.
It's my hello world.
Yeah, and for me, with a new Drupal 10 module developer, this is, I think, just a great place to start because I'm going to steal your phrase. You can kind of follow the breadcrumbs, right? If I type this path into my browser, there's a route that defines that path. And that route says when someone hits this path, then this method of this class responds. And that's your controller. And then you open up your controller, you look at that method, and you see that method returns a render array, which has been around since, dinosaurs roamed the earth as far as Drupal's concerned, right? So, but just connecting those dots from path to routing file to controller class method to render array. That's a really, really important just kind of, traverse, we'll say, just to understand how that all, is put together. So don't underestimate, like little wins like that. Because, and again, this is the part that I find so amazing about Drupal. If you understand that simple thing, you can go into any routing file in any module, core or contrib or custom, and understand, I would say conservatively, 80% of what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. Are there more things in routing files that go above and beyond, that simple thing? Absolutely. But if you can understand that bit, then now you're on your way, right? Now you understand 5 to 10% of every module out there. So, and then after this week,
that's good.
With plugins, we're going to bite off another chunk of that because you're going to get comfortable with 3 different kinds of plugins. And these 3 types of plugins you will find in all kinds of core and contrib modules. And so that will eat up another chunk of, and not, after next week, you'll be able to look at a bunch of core and contributor modules and say, oh, now I understand what's going on with those directories and those files. And granted, I mean, we're kind of starting with the easy stuff, but easy, relatively speaking, easy. But
it took a lot of effort just to get to the point where I could make that hello world step.
Right.
So it feels good accomplishment.
Yep. All right. Very good. All right. Well, anything else about last week, or should we move forward?
I think the only other thing, and this isn't so much something that I think is a long conversation. There were a few files that were a little curious to me. There was, for example, the .eslint.rc, which I'm guessing is a linting configuration for ECMA script.
I believe so. I don't use it. Oh, I should know the answer to this. I'm not a big JavaScript guy, so I don't.
Same.
Yeah, I believe you're on the right track there. Let's just say that. I don't want to pretend like I know something I clearly do not.
And also under the modules directory, there was config. There was config install and config schema, which is, I'm assuming this is what you run when you install a module, and this is the schema that corresponds to what, database tables or something else?
Yeah. Okay. So this I know. Unfortunately, there's actually a third one. There's config/optional as well, which can be there.
Okay.
So let's start with configuration that exists in a module inside of the config/install directory is configuration that gets installed when the module is enabled. Now, the key factor here is if the configuration in that config install directory cannot be imported for any reason, the module will not enable. So it is like required configuration that must be imported when that configuration is enabled. I'm sorry, when that module is enabled. So config install is required configuration. The configuration that appears in config/optional is optional configuration. If it can get imported, great. If it can't get imported, it will not stop the module from being enabled.
Okay.
So far, so good?
Yep. So a bit more flexible.
Yes. All right. Config schema, something a little bit different. Config schema defines the schema of the configuration settings for that module. So if that module, views is a great example, right? When you create a view and you're turning all the dials and levers and widgets and all that crazy views interface, all of the values, that whole view gets stored in config. Well, the schema of that whole crazy interface has to be it's been defined, meaning like the page. Well, yeah, let's say the display title is a string, right? The list of fields in schema talk is a sequence, and that sequence is made up of a string and another sequence and this and that. I mean, just the whole. It's one of the darker, deeper rabbit holes of Drupal backend development. And I went right to the worst possible example, which is the views module.
It's a beast.
Yeah, a simpler one. If you think about the site settings configuration page, that's the page on a Drupal site where you put the site name, site slogan, and so the config schema for that is obviously a bit simpler, right? The site name is going to be text or a string. The site slogan is going to be a string. What else? I forget what else is even on there. The email address of the admin or something is going to be a string. So, but in order for that config to be, this gets into a whole other discussion. Let me just say this and say, if you want to have an automated test involving your module's configuration, you must have a properly written config/schema file.
Okay.
Let me leave it at that. Otherwise, the discussion is going to become a very long discussion. But great question, though.
There's the breadcrumb.
Yeah, that's a great question. All right. Anything else?
All right. No, I think that's good. I'll go keep investigating. It leaves me more to chew on. But yeah, let's get back focused for what are we doing next week?
Yeah. Okay. So again, we want to keep our eye on the ball. So this is the 4th episode, I believe. And we're talking 6 to 8 episodes, probably closer to 8 than 6, with the goal of having you in a position where you can contribute an automated test of some form to a contributed module. And we'll talk about, I'll figure out some potential ones. We'll talk about that in a later episode, but that's the goal. So with that goal in mind, I still want to expose you to a little bit more of module development. And now that we have kind of routing and controllers, let's say in the rearview mirror somewhat, usually the next aspect of Drupal module development that I expose folks to is plugins. And plugins are awesome because they're all over Drupal. Field formatters are plugins. Field widgets are plugins. Image effects are plugins. Custom blocks are plugins. Migrations can be plugins. CK editor buttons can be plugins. text filters are plugins. So the list goes on and on. A lot of things in Drupal core are plugins. The nice thing about plugins is they are self-contained normally they are self-contained in a single class. And that class lives in a very specific folder inside of your module's SRC directory. So for this week, we're still going to stick with the examples module. There's a submodule in there called field example.
Okay.
And this submodule uses plugins to create a new field type, along with, I think, a couple of field formatters and one widget, maybe two. I forget how many widgets are in there, but you get a handful of plugins in there of 3 different types: field type, field widget, field plugin. And this is, after this module, after you go through field example, you should be able to crack open like the core telephone module, the core email module, the core link module. If you're feeling even a little bit froggy, you can crack open the contributed address module, because these are all field plugins with custom formatters and custom widgets.
Okay.
So I put some links, and they'll be in the show notes as well. A Drupal.org doc page, just background info on plugins. There's probably 8 or 10 subpages off that. But to start, there's really only 3 that you need to look at. And one of them is an overview of plugins. Another one is kind of makes the case for why we're using plugins in Drupal. And then another one has to do with annotations, which I mentioned earlier as well. But yeah, I think that's a great place to go next, is go and explore the field example module and get a nice feeling for plugins. And I think you will be, for me, this is really where like the organization of modern Drupal really shines, especially compared to Drupal 7.
Yeah.
Whereas the Wild West of, hooks everywhere with no rhyme or reason as to the order or where they lived, or, this is like, someone came in and cleaned up and said, no, all you widgets, get over there in your corner, and formatters, you're over there.
The code is a lot cleaner as a result.
Yeah.
It's more consistent, and I'm sure it's easier to maintain. But yeah, I think that'll do. I already cracked it while we were talking, and I can see the ones that you're referring to. And I'm familiar with. I remember when Address came out, partly to support Drupal commerce. Sure, and I was really happy about that.
Yep.
I think that's good. So thank you very much for going through that. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, have at it, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Talk then. Have a good week.
I'm not surprised this is another great episode. Chad explained the process of how he installed those gitignore files, and like me, went through that series of mistakes where he committed vendor files. And so he actually talked a little bit about how he had to unweave and back it up a bit. Mike iterated that there's no clear documentation on how to do this, and folks have to figure it out on their own how to set it up. So to me, that seems like a really good opportunity for someone in the community to make a contribution in that gitignore documentation space. Mike also showed Chad how to find the test directory in the code base and gave a quick overview on how the files are organized in modules. This is invaluable if you're not familiar with Drupal 10. And he mentioned testing again, emphasizing that it is one of Chad's goals to contribute by adding automated tests to modules. And it really looks like Chad is enjoying playing around with the different extensions in VS Code and picking up new standards along the way. What a good way to get to know the new coding standards by doing those extensions and plugins. So stay tuned for next week for some module development where we see how our developer does with the submodule field example and the examples module, so they can get better acquainted with plugins and widgets. And always, Skills Upgrade is supported by Talking Drupal and Drupal Easy. You can visit talkingdrupal.com for this episode's show notes and resources. You can also visit drupaleasy.com and register for an upcoming intensive Drupal training course. To learn more about our developer or to contact Chad Hester, you can find information on his website, chadkhester.com. And Mike Anello's contact information is on drupaleasy.com/contact-us. And he is Ultimike across Mastodon, LinkedIn, X, and all the Drupal Easy stuff. You can find me as Volkswagen Chick on Mastodon and LinkedIn. And as an employee of the Linux Foundation, I want y'all to know that we're offering a 30% discount off e-learning courses, certifications, and bundles with the code, all uppercase, Drupal24, and that is good through June 5th. Really looking forward to seeing what next week brings us.